Now, let's drift off to sleep. Today, you'll be falling asleep during a thunderstorm inside of a cozy camper trailer next to a lake in the mountains. Imagine you are feeling exhausted, hot, and sweaty as you return to your camper. You've just conquered your long-held dream of hiking to the very summit of Moonrest Mountain. You've changed into your swimsuit and are now standing at the edge of the dock on weary, trembling legs, ready to celebrate your incredible achievement with a refreshing dive into the cool, crystal-clear waters of Silver Lake. With your arms raised above your head and ready to dive in, you glance at the slow-moving dark clouds on the horizon. Beads of sweat are still clinging to your forehead when you push off the dock and soar through the air before gliding perfectly into the water. The crisp, cool water envelops you, gently massaging your entire being. You can almost taste the clean, mineral freshness of the water as it washes away all the sweat, dust, and grime from your skin. While breathing in deeply, you are met with the glorious sense of renewal. You feel utterly refreshed and rejuvenated. You swim back to the dock and climb the cool aluminum ladder. Then, standing there with a soft cotton towel draped around your shoulders, you gaze out across the deep blue lake. Here and there, motorboats, canoes, sailboats, and jet skis are now headed towards the shores. Everyone knows rain is coming. Kids wearing life vests and learning how to water ski are hoisted back into boats, and the small, colorful sails of dinghies flutter in the breeze as their little suntanned captains point them back towards land. Now, all toweled off and feeling a little bit chilled, you walk barefoot back to your camper ahead of the rain. At the little picnic table, you collect your book, coffee mug, and sunglasses. You gather up other items and place them into a plastic tote. A salt and pepper shaker, a box of wooden matches, some paper plates. You secure the lid on the tote and move the Coleman lantern under the table. At the fire pit, you fold up your camping chair and tuck it below the protective cover of a tall ponderosa pine. Then you return to your camper, open the door, and step inside. In the little kitchenette, you set water to boil for tea. And then you change into your favorite, coziest leisure wear. while the hot tea steeps, you settle at the quaint table and gaze out the window, watching as boats reach the shore and families hurry off to their campers and tents and cabins. Now, with a warm cup of tea in hand and nestled in your soft, comfy clothes, you feel your body slowly warming again. You bring the mug to your lips. The fragrant steam curls around your face as you take a tiny sip. The tea is smooth, rich, and the perfect temperature. You take a bigger sip, and the tea flows down to your core, melting away the chill from the lake. A rush of warmth spreads throughout your body, like a wave of little goosebumps, and you're suddenly filled with a sense of deep accomplishment, peace, and satisfaction. Now, as you sit here at Silver Lake, let's prepare for sleep. First, close your eyes and simply become aware of your breathing, feeling your chest gently rise and fall again. Next, let's take a few deeper breaths. We will slowly fill our lungs with the cool, sweet scent of pine trees and that fresh mountain air. And then, after holding briefly, we will let it all go and exhale. Ready? Breathe in deeply, hold for 3, 2, 1, and then exhale. One more time. Breathe in deeply, hold for 3, 2, 1, and exhale. And try thinking to yourself, as I am here at Silver Lake, I can feel gravity pulling me back towards Earth. With every exhale, I can feel the slow rotation of Earth and the Earth's steady movement around the sun. I can feel my tired feet, my ankles, my fatigued calves, my knees, and my legs becoming heavier and heavier and more relaxed. You finish the last sip of your perfect tea, and then you pick up a little pencil and notebook resting on the table. With them in hand, you make your way to the sleeping nook at the other end of the camper, where you collapse heavily into the soft, wide bed. After the long, steep hike up Moonrest Mountain, the bed feels like a soft cloud beneath your tired body. The little windows by the bed are cracked open, and your nostrils catch the pleasant scent of fresh rain on pine needles and moss. You look at your notepad and observe your to-do list. Each completed task is neatly crossed out with pencil. At the bottom of the page is one final entry on this list. A smile creeps across your face as you take the pencil and begin scribbling over that last item: climb Moonrest Mountain. You set the notepad aside, thinking how perfect everything feels at this moment. You've completed everything you set out to do here. Tomorrow holds no obligations, and for now, everything is done, finished, and complete. You have earned this wonderful moment of absolute peace. Your body sinks deeper into the soft bed. Every muscle relaxes from the tips of your fingers to the soles of your tired feet as you surrender to the peace and calm and take in the rich mountain air. Let's take a few more deep breaths before drifting off to sleep. Ready? Breathe in deeply, hold for 3, 2, 1, and then exhale. One more time. Breathe in deeply, hold for 3, 2, 1, and exhale. Try thinking to yourself, as I lay here at Silver Lake, I can feel gravity pulling me back towards Earth. With every exhale, I experience my body feeling heavier and heavier and more relaxed. I can feel my tired arms, my hands, my torso, shoulders, neck, and head becoming heavier and more relaxed. My whole body feels at peace as gravity's pull tugs me gently and tucks me safely into this ever so soft bed. Now, feeling oh so satisfied, safe, accomplished, rejuvenated, sleepy, and happy, you reach over to a little transistor radio, tune it to your favorite station, then lay back and close your eyes. Loss of the steamship Titanic. Report of a formal investigation into the circumstances attending the foundering on April 15, 1912, of the British steamship Titanic of Liverpool after striking ice in or near latitude 41 degrees 46 minutes north, longitude 50 degrees 14 minutes west, North Atlantic Ocean, whereby loss of life ensued. Section 6. The Board of Trade's Administration. Extension of life-saving apparatus tables. It will be seen that I have given priority in importance to the form of ships' boats, rather than to their number on the principle that a few reliable boats are of greater value than a large number of indifferent ones. but if the former desirable condition can be obtained by the proposed alterations in our rules as to measurement, etc., we are freer to approach the question of adding to the number of boats provided for in the existing tables. As with the question of ratio D to B dealt with by the advisory committee last year, so with the question of boat increase and relative increase of cubic capacity dealt with by them on the same occasion, perhaps the board might inform the committee that they are not satisfied that a slightly different recommendation might not have been made had the matter been still further considered at the time. Referring to the table of boat capacities computed by them particularly, it might be helpful if the board laid before them for consideration the table, which I attach hereto and submit as showing a more reasonable proportionate increase in capacity than appears so far, in my opinion, in the other papers before us. It will be seen in this statement that the number of boats recommended by the advisory committee is practically retained, but the unit of increase in capacity is put at 300 cubic feet. Perhaps I should state here what actuated me in fixing upon this rate of increase. I realized that in all probability it would become the practice on these large liners to provide boats under davits which would contain the entire cubic feet required by the LSA rules. That is, the quantity required by rule under davits plus the addition of 3/4. And it occurred to me that if, after the figure 5,500 cubic feet, the increase of capacity were uniform and moderate, it would result in a total at 1 3/4, which would by incidence fit in with the scale of boats already recommended as requisite in the report of the advisory committee, and in my own, that is, assuming that the boats are of 500 cubic feet. Example, take a vessel of 30,000 tons and under 35,000 tons. According to the table I submit, she would be required to have by the 1 3/4 rule a total boat capacity of 12,500 cubic feet, which at 500 cubic feet per boat equals 24 boats nearly. There should be no difficulty on the large ships in carrying this quantity under davits, that is, 18 directly under davits and 6 boats inboard. Please see incidental table attached. Mr. A.H. Young, Professional Advisor of the Board of Trade. March 28, 1912. Please see the accompanying incidental table showing how this number of boats can provide for the 3/4 additional capacity also, if of about 500 cubic feet per boat to 600 cubic feet. 1/4 of the above boats may be carried inboard, but they should not exceed 500 cubic feet in capacity, so that they may be readily drawn up to the davits. AHY, March 30th, 1912. Draft Amendment of General Rules. 1. Boats. All boats shall be constructed and properly equipped as provided by these rules, and shall be of such form and proportions that they shall have sufficient freeboard and ample stability in a seaway when loaded with their full complement of persons and equipment. All thwart and side seats must be fitted as low in the boat as practicable, and bottom boards must be fitted so that the thwarts shall not be more than 2 feet 9 inches above them. All boats and other life-saving appliances are to be kept ready for use to the satisfaction of the Board of Trade. Internal buoyancy apparatus may be constructed of wood or of copper or yellow metal of not less than 18 ounces to the superficial foot, or of other durable material. Section A. A boat of this section shall be a lifeboat of whaleboat form, properly constructed of wood or metal, having for every 10 cubic feet of her capacity, computed as in Rule 2, at least 1 cubic foot of strong and serviceable enclosed airtight compartments, so constructed that water cannot find its way into them. In the case of metal boats, an addition will have to be made to the cubic capacity of the airtight compartments, so as to give them buoyancy equal to that of the wooden boat. Section B. A boat of this section shall be a lifeboat of whaleboat form properly constructed of wood or metal, having inside and outside buoyancy apparatus together equal in efficiency to the buoyancy apparatus provided for a boat of section A. At least one half of the buoyancy apparatus must be attached to the outside of the boat. Section C. A boat of this section shall be a lifeboat properly constructed of wood or metal, having some buoyancy apparatus attached to the inside and or outside of the boat, equal in efficiency to one half of the buoyancy apparatus provided for a boat of section A or section B. At least one half of the buoyancy apparatus must be attached to the outside of the boat. Section D. A boat of this section shall be a properly constructed boat of wood or metal. Section E. A boat of this section shall be a boat of approved construction, form, and material, and may be collapsible. 2. Cubic capacity. The cubic capacity of an open boat and of a deck boat of section D or section E shall be ascertained by multiplying the product of the length, breadth, and depth by 6, subject, however, to the following provisions. The length shall be measured from the foreside of the rabbet on the stem to the afterside of the rabbet on the stern post, and the breadth shall be measured from the outside of plank to the outside of plank amidships. The actual depth shall be measured from the top of the gunwale to the top of the bottom plank next to the keel, but the depth used in calculating the cubic capacity shall not in any case exceed 3.6 feet. And if the actual depth measured is equal to or less than 3.6 feet, the depth used in calculating the cubic capacity shall not exceed 45% of the breadth measured, as indicated above. If the oars are pulled in rowlocks, the bottom of the rowlock is to be considered as the gunwale in measuring the depth of the boat. If any question is raised requiring absolute accuracy, the cubic capacity of a boat shall be ascertained by Stirling's rule, subject to the foregoing provisions as to depth. 3. Number of persons for boats. A. Subject to the provisions of paragraphs B, C, and D. Of this clause, the number of persons an open boat of section A shall be deemed fit to carry shall be the number of cubic feet ascertained as in Rule 2 divided by 10, and the number of persons an open boat of section B or section C, or an open or decked boat of section D or section E shall be deemed fit to carry shall be the number of cubic feet ascertained as in Rule 2 divided by 8. The space in the boat shall be sufficient for the seating of the persons carried in it and for the proper use of the oars. B. An open boat of section A or section B or section C or section D or section E shall not be deemed to be fit to carry the number of persons ascertained as in paragraph A of this clause, unless the boat is so constructed that it has a mean shear of at least half an inch for each foot of its length, and that the boat's half-girth amidships measured outside the planking from the side of the keel to the top of the gunwale is at least equal to 9/10 of the sum of the boat's depth inside and half its maximum breadth amidships, and that the mean of the half-girths measured in the same manner at 2 points, 1/4 of the length of the boat from the stem and stern post, respectively, is at least equal to 8/10 of the sum of the depth inside and half the maximum breadth amidships. C. A decked boat of Section D or Section E shall not be deemed to be fit to carry the number of persons ascertained as in paragraph A of this clause, unless the top of the deck amidships is at a height above the water approved by the Board of Trade when the boat is so loaded. D. If the surveyor is doubtful as to the number of persons any open or decked boat is fit to carry, he may require the boat to be tested afloat with the intended number of persons on board. E. The rules numbers 1, 2, and 3, as now amended, are not to be retrospective and are to apply only to boats built after. Ship's boats. The salient feature of the reports of the board's officers on this subject is the consensus of opinion that the form of a boat is the chief factor to be considered in determining its value as a life-saving appliance. It has been found that while there are many boats of good form supplied to ships, there is yet a large proportion where the boats are not only not so good, but which can only be regarded as unsafe if they had on board anything approaching the number of persons for which they measure. It is the latter type we are chiefly concerned with. How is it that the form has so deteriorated as to create this concern in our minds? I think the cause is not far to seek. It appears to be the outcome of 1. The ship owner's desire to carry the maximum number of persons in the minimum number of boats. 2. In the efforts of the shipbuilder, as a rule, to carry out the specification in which he has contracted to supply the owners with boats at a price, often very low, and naturally he does not sublet his contract with the boat builder at a loss. 3. The aim of the competing boat builder, which is to build his boats at as little cost price as possible, and yet to provide accommodation for the prescribed number of persons. He is probably limited as to length, and therefore relies on the breadth and depth. In this direction, he is unintentionally assisted by the board's rule for measurement, namely L times B times D times 0.6 or 8. So long, therefore, as he can obtain his breadth at 1 point for measurement purposes, it is quite immaterial to him how soon he finds a way to the ends, with the result that the stability of the boat becomes almost entirely dependent upon the form of a very limited midship section, or the still smaller proportion of same that would be underwater when in the loaded condition. The boat builder may be further restricted as to breadth, and therefore he again detracts from the form a boat should have by dispensing with sheer and increasing the depth from keel to gunwale amidships. This method of building boats enables him to obtain the capacity required by the owner at the expense of the boat's stability and utility. No doubt when the life-saving appliances rules came into being, the divisors 10 and 8 for the different sections were deemed safe on the supposition that the usual full form of boat would not be largely departed from. Experience has shown, however, that form is frequently sacrificed for the unworthy objects referred to above, and it follows, therefore, that either the form should be improved or a heavier divisor laid down. It would, I think, be more effective to deal with form and devise a rule by which we can ensure that a boat will be reasonably safe with its load, not merely in smooth water, as in our recent test, but in a seaway. It is essential, therefore, to draw the attention of the advisory committee to the value the board attached to form, and particularly to that part of it under water, emphasizing the great necessity there is for an increase to the bearing surface of the underwater portion of boats, and this end can, no doubt, be best attained by the putting into practice of the suggestions made by the principal ship surveyor for amending the rules, and which aim at prolonging the form or fullness of dimension of the midship body underwater well toward the ends of the boat. It is well known that by extending the body in this way, greater buoyancy and stability are secured without materially affecting the speed. It is often supposed that defective stability due to bad form can be rectified by the disposition of the persons or things, but anyone with real experience of boats in a seaway cannot fail to realize that this is the wrong principle to work on. Granted, therefore, that the question of form must take priority, how can it be best attained? And if we refer to Mr. Archer's method of measurement as stated in his amendment to the rules, it will be seen how simple and effective it is. For the purpose of illustration, we might take the model of a ship's boat obtained through the board surveyors at Glasgow, the dimensions of which enlarged to scale represent a boat of LBD divided by 30.0 times 8.5 times 3.5 and is an embodiment of the proportions amidships and at quarter distance from each end proposed by Mr. Archer. It cannot be too strongly urged that for a ship's lifeboat to be fit to carry the number of persons it measures for in any degree of safety, whenever it may be required at sea, the underwater or bearing surface should be carried out to the ends as much as possible and all straight lines avoided. The bows of many of the existing types of boat are examples of the worst possible form for safety, and the counters are as bad, if they can be said to have any. Depth. It appears from the reports that the most generally approved ratio of depth to the breadth is 4:10. This has been established not only by our long experience, but by the numerous tests recently conducted by the board surveyors at various ports, and the attention of the advisory committee might be drawn to this fact. It is, of course, necessary also to have a good freeboard, but a well-proportioned boat does not require so much freeboard as the commoner type, as with proper sheer and underwater surface she is easy in a seaway. If the gunwale is too high, there is loss of power over the oars, which is serious when, for the safety of the boat, she is required to be kept head-on to sea, and with a fresh breeze, even in a good boat, this is not always an easy matter. It is a matter for consideration that at the tests made by our surveyors, the conditions were most favorable, being usually in smooth water of a sheltered dock. And in not a few instances, considerable anxiety was felt for the safety of those on board when crowded in accordance to the existing rules. If it was thus in smooth water, one dare hardly contemplate the results in a seaway. If the ship owner does not see to it that a safe type of boat is provided, then the number of persons to be accommodated in boats which do not come up to the proportions deemed safe by the Board of Trade should be very considerably curtailed. AHY, March the 23rd, 1912. Construction of ships' boats. It will, I think, be useful to consider the principal factors that govern the dimensions of boats forming part of the life-saving apparatus in merchant ships. The minimum number and capacity of boats are determined by the regulations, and the capacity is determined by the product of the length, breadth, and depth of the boats. As the space on the ship in which to stow the boats is generally limited, it is generally found easier to increase their depth than the length or breadth, and this is further encouraged, I believe, by the cost of boats being quoted at so much per foot in length. The builder or owner determines the dimensions of the boat builder is concerned merely with the construction and, in most cases, usually their form or lines. Attention has been called by the Mark Lane surveyors to the form and proportions of the boats used in the Royal Navy. The proportion of depth to breadth is greater than is apparent from the particulars given, as all boats larger than a 30-foot gig have 6.5-inch washboards above the gunwale, and even the gigs and many of the smaller boats have portable washboards. It must also be remembered that all the Navy boats are square-sterned except the whaleboat, and are designed with easy lines so as to make good sailors. No air cases are fitted, and the seats are kept very low. The boats are not provided simply as life-saving appliances. As a matter of fact, the life-saving equipment of a warship is extremely small. It is true that each type of boat is given a certain life-saving capacity, which is ascertained by crowding in as many men as practicable with boat in still water and all equipment on board. This number agrees closely with that obtained by the board's rule L times B times D times 0.68. These boats, moreover, have a much smaller freeboard than is considered desirable in the merchant navy, but the occupants are all under discipline and in charge of experienced seamen. In the mercantile marine, it may and often does happen that the boats are crowded with panic-stricken men, women, and children, and instances have occurred, I believe, wherein there has not been a single man in the boat who has ever handled an oar before. Having these points in view, I do not agree that the Navy type of boat is the most suitable for our purpose. The chief desiderata in a ship's boat as a life-saving appliance are: 1. To carry the maximum number of people without overcrowding, and with 2. A reasonable amount of stability and freeboard. 3. And without undue interference with the use of oars. 1. Is almost wholly dependent on the length and breadth of the boat, provided 2. Is satisfied. Depth has very little influence on it. For example, take a boat 30 by 9 by 3.5, 567 cubic feet by our rule. As a section D or E boat, it should carry 567 divided by 8 equals 72 people. Such a boat should allow 30 by 9 by 8 over 72 equals 3 square feet of area per person at the gunwale, which should be ample if all sit in the bottom, who cannot find seating room on the side benches or thwarts. 2. Stability and freeboard are dependent upon the boat's breadth, depth, and form. The element of length does not enter into it, and it would be most unreasonable to limit the ratio of length to breadth, as suggested from Liverpool, or to limit the depth to the cube root of the length, as proposed by one of the London surveyors. Mr. Gemmell gives particulars, mass 26,298 of 4 boats tested, which proved to have ample accommodation and stability for the complements allowed by the regulations. The ratio of depth to breadth varied from 0.41 to 0.45. Captain O'Sullivan also reported 5 boats which he tested with ratios of D to B varying from 0.4 to 0.44, all except one being satisfactory, the exception being rather tender and overcrowded due to poor lines. The freeboards of all these boats when loaded were, I think, sufficient. The depth in no case exceeded 3.6, and only in one case did the ratio exceed 0.44. The surveyors, Liverpool, tested a boat 3.75 deep and having a ratio of D over B equals 0.41, which proved satisfactory. Captain Griffiths tested a boat 4.1 deep, having a ratio D over B equals 0.455, which he considered to be unsafe with the full complement on board. The consensus of opinion is that the depth should not exceed 3 feet 5 inches or 3 feet 6 inches, and the ratio of D over B should not exceed 0.44. This, however, is not sufficient to guarantee sufficient seating and stability. Captain Clark tested a boat 24.4 by 6.55 by 2.45, which was very unsafe with the rule complement on board. The ratio D over B is only 0.38 in this case, It will be seen, however, that this craft has exceptionally fine lines and is evidently quite unsuited to carry the rule complement. It is quite evident that the form of the boat must be taken into account. The dimensions of boats vary so greatly that generally the boat builder builds his boats to the eye, using only a midship mold. It follows that the forms of boats of the same dimensions will vary considerably and with different workmen. Something more is required than a limitation in the ratio of depth to breadth. It is desirable that the sheer should be ample and the form not unduly fined away within the midship half length. From consideration of the particulars and lines of the boats mentioned in the surveyor's reports, I think a simple rule to regulate the form may be devised, such as I will indicate later. It is, I think, necessary to limit the depth as a factor for ascertaining the number to be accommodated. The increase of depth beyond a certain point, while unduly increasing the number of people that may be carried, increases proportionately the required air case capacity, to meet which the seats have to be raised with a corresponding increase in the height of the center of gravity and decrease in the stability and difficulty in rowing. A boat 3.6 deep would have the thwarts about 3 feet above the bottom, and any increase in this height makes it very difficult for any ordinary man to row when sitting down. In rough sea, the men would have very little control over the oars if standing up. A further objection to the very deep boat is its small stability in the light condition. It is not, I believe, an unusual occurrence for such boats to capsize in rough weather before the passengers or crew can be got into them, and I have myself seen such a boat capsize in dock with only 2 men in it, due to lumpy water and a stiff breeze catching it on the beam when coming out of the shelter afforded by the dock wall. I do not think, however, any limit of depth should be imposed, except as a measure of capacity. Any rules that may be devised should be such as are of easy and ready application, and which will not bear harshly on the boats that have already been accepted. I therefore suggest that the present rules will sufficiently meet the case with the following modification. In no case should the depth to be used in General Rule 2 exceed 3.6 feet and 45% of the breadth. In all cases where the actual depth is 45% of the breadth or less, the maximum number of persons, as ascertained by Rule 3, should not be allowed unless the boat has been found capable of carrying that number by actual test in the water, or unless the boat has at least 1/2 inch of shear per foot of length, and the half girth amidships measured outside the plank from the side of the keel to the top of the gunwale is at least 90% of the sum of the depth and the half breadth, and the mean of the half girths as similarly measured at 1/4 the boat's length from the stem and stern post are at least 80% of the sum of the midship depth and half breadth. The thwarts and side benches should be kept as low as practicable, and the bottom board should be so fitted that the height of the thwarts above them will not exceed 2 feet 9 inches. AJD, January 27, 1912. Mr. A.J. Daniel, Acting Principal Ship Surveyor to the Board of Trade. It should be stated that the new committee on bulkheads mentioned in the paragraphs of this letter, which deals with Rule 12, has now been formed. Subsequently, Sir Walter Howell wrote and sent 3 letters to the Advisory Committee, which were as follows. Board of Trade, Marine Department, 7 Whitehall Gardens, London, S.W., April 20th, 1912. Sir, with reference to previous correspondence between the Department and your Committee, respecting the revision of the statutory rules for life-saving appliances on British ships, and particularly to the letter from this Department of April 16th, I am directed by the Board of Trade to state that as an entirely new situation has been created by the recent disaster to the steamship Titanic, they assume that the committee, in reconsidering the matter in connection with the suggestions already put before them by the board, will have full regard to this new situation and the facts of the disaster so far as ascertained. As you are doubtless aware, suggestions have been made in the House of Commons and elsewhere to the effect that, in view of the loss of the Titanic, action should be taken by the Board of Trade in regard to certain questions other than those expressly dealt with in the life-saving appliances rules. For example, in regard to 1. Steamship routes in the North Atlantic, 2. The speed of steamers where there may be dangers to navigation, and 3. The provision and use of searchlights on large passenger steamers. And the board would be glad to know the committee's views in regard to these and any other suggestions which may have come to their knowledge intended to diminish the risk or to mitigate the effects of accidents to passenger vessels at sea. I am, etc., Walter J. Howell. The Secretary, Merchant Shipping Advisory Committee, Board of Trade, Marine Department, 7 Whitehall Gardens, London, Southwest, April 24th, 1912. Sir, with reference to previous correspondence between this department and your committee respecting the revision of the statutory rules for life-saving appliances on British ships, and particularly to the letter from this department of April 16th, in which you were informed that the question of the proposed amendment of the rules so as to admit of decked lifeboats being stowed one above another or one under an open lifeboat was under consideration, I am directed by the Board of Trade to state, for the information of your committee, that the Board of Trade will be glad if the committee will consider whether any, and if so what, amendments of the rules, and in particular of the rule of April 19th, 1910, and the rule of June 14th, 1911, are, in their opinion, desirable with the object of supplementing the boats immediately under davits by as much additional boat accommodation as is practicable, having regard to the new situation which has been created by the recent disaster to the steamship Titanic. A plan illustrating the principle is being prepared so as to be in readiness for your committee by Friday. I am, etc., Walter J. Howell. The Secretary, Merchant Shipping Advisory Committee, Board of Trade, Marine Department, 7, Whitehall Gardens, London, Southwest, April 25th, 1912. Sir, with reference to previous correspondence respecting the proposed revision of the statutory regulations as to boats and life-saving appliances on ships, I am directed by the Board of Trade to state, for the information of the Merchant Shipping Advisory Committee, that apart from the questions which have been raised regarding the boat accommodation on vessels over 10,000 tons, it seems desirable to consider whether the provision of boats and other life-saving appliances required by the rules in the case of vessels under 10,000 tons is satisfactory, or whether the rules or the boat scale should be altered in respect of their application to such vessels. And the Board would be glad to be favored with the observations of the committee on this point, in addition to those that have already been referred to them. I am, etc., Walter J. Howell. The Secretary, Merchant Shipping Advisory Committee. To these letters, the Advisory Committee sent the following answer. Merchant Shipping Advisory Committee, 7, Whitehall Gardens, London, Southwest, April 27, 1912. Sir, we are desired by the Merchant Shipping Advisory Committee to inform you that your letters of the 16th, 20th, 24th, and 25th instant were brought before the committee at a meeting held yesterday. The committee fully recognized that the proved impossibility of keeping such a vessel as the Titanic afloat after a collision with ice until the arrival of outside succor has created an entirely new situation, which was neither in the contemplation of the Board of Trade nor of the committee in the consideration of the extension of the existing boat scale in regard to vessels of 10,000 tons and upward. In advising on such extension in July last, the committee aimed at providing ample boat accommodation on large passenger vessels in accordance with the principles that were adopted by the original Life-Saving Appliances Committee, and which principles had apparently been fully justified by many years of experience. It is with satisfaction that the committee note that the Board of Trade, apart from the new possibilities demonstrated by the loss of the Titanic, agreed in the essentials with the recommendation of the committee. In face of the new facts, the committee at their meeting yesterday reopened entirely the question of the revision of the boat scale for large passenger vessels, with a view of providing the maximum of protection for the passengers and crew in the event of an overwhelming disaster, whilst at the same time maintaining the principles in regard to the stability and seagoing qualities of the ship itself, and to the prompt and efficient handling of the boats carried under the existing scale, which hitherto have proved not only essential to safety, but also adequate for all ordinary emergencies. The questions involved are not free from difficulty, but they will receive the immediate attention of the committee. Pending their consideration, the committee note that assurances have been received by the Board of Trade from representatives of most of the large passenger lines to the effect that every effort will be made to equip their vessels at the earliest possible moment with boats and rafts sufficient to accommodate all persons on board. In regard to the recommendation forwarded with the committee's letter of July 4th last, that the Board of Trade should, having regard to the developments in shipbuilding since the report of the Committee of 1891 on spacing and construction of watertight bulkheads, review the requirements designed to attain the standards at present enforced under Rule 12, the Advisory Committee note that the Board of Trade have under consideration the appointment of a committee of equal standing to that of the Committee of 1891. In view of the great importance of this question, the Advisory Committee desire us respectfully to urge that such a committee be appointed at as early a date as possible. The subject of the general revision of the statutory regulations as to boats and life-saving appliances on all ships, which, apart from the questions regarding the boat accommodation on vessels over 10,000 tons, is for the first time referred to the Advisory Committee by the letter of the 25th instant, together with the particular questions raised in the letters of the 16th, 20th, and 24th instant, are also receiving the immediate attention of the committee. At yesterday's meeting, subcommittees were appointed to give immediate consideration to the subjects requiring detailed examination. These subcommittees will pursue their inquiries concurrently, and we are desired by the Advisory Committee to inform you that their investigation into the revision of the life-saving appliances rules will be proceeded with as expeditiously as possible. We are, etc., Norman Hill, Chairman, R.W. Matthew, Secretary, Sir Walter J. Howell, KCB, Assistant Secretary, Marine Department, Board of Trade. This letter was acknowledged by the Board of Trade on May 10, 1912, as follows. Board of Trade, Marine Department 7, Whitehall Gardens, London, Southwest, May 10, 1912. Sir, I am directed by the Board of Trade to acknowledge the receipt of, and to thank you for, your letter of April 27th, stating that their letters of April 16th, 20, 24, and 25 have been considered by the Merchant Shipping Advisory Committee. The Board observes with satisfaction that, in view of the entirely new situation which has arisen, the advisory committee have decided to reopen the question of the revision of the table in the life-saving appliances rules insofar as it governs the boat accommodation in vessels over 10,000 tons gross. The board are further glad to observe that the question of a general revision of the life-saving appliances rules is also under consideration by the committee. And in this connection, they presume that in considering the question of a general revision of the rules, including the table, the committee will consider the principles on which the requirements as to boat accommodation should be based, including inter alia, whether the table should continue to be based on tonnage. Any conclusion reached by the committee on this question would naturally affect the revision of the present table as applying to vessels of more than 10,000 tons, upon which the committee has already been engaged. The board agree with the view expressed by the advisory committee that the appointment of another committee on the spacing and construction of watertight bulkheads is desirable. Steps have already been taken by the president to form such a committee, and he hopes to be able to announce the names within a few days. A further communication on this point will be addressed to the committee in the course of a few days. The board are glad to note that subcommittees have been appointed to deal concurrently with the subjects requiring detailed consideration in connection with the revision of the life-saving appliances rules. The board desire me to add that they assume that the committee, in considering the matters referred to them, will have regard to all important aspects of the question of life-saving appliances, whether expressly dealt with in the statutory rules or not, and in particular to the essential question of the adequacy of the provision for lowering and manning the boats and rafts carried by vessels. I am, etc., Walter J. Howell. The Secretary, Merchant Shipping Advisory Committee, 7 Whitehall Gardens, Southwest. This finishes the history of the action of the Board of Trade in relation to the provision of boat accommodation on emigrant ships. The outstanding circumstance in it is the omission, during so many years, to revise the rules of 1894, and this, I think, was blamable, notwithstanding the excuse or explanation put forward by Sir Alfred Chalmers. I am, however, doubtful whether, even if the rules had been revised, the change would have been such as to have required boat accommodation, which would have increased the number of lives saved. Having regard to the recommendations of the Advisory Committee, the Board of Trade would probably not have felt justified in making rules, which would have required more boat accommodation than that with which the Titanic was actually provided. And it is not to be forgotten that the Titanic boat accommodation was utilized to less than 2/3 of its capacity. These considerations, however, afford no excuse for the delay of the Board of Trade. The gross tonnage of a vessel is not, in my opinion, a satisfactory basis on which to calculate the provision of boat accommodation. Hitherto, I believe it has been accepted as the best basis by all nations. But there seems much more to be said in favor of making the number of lives carried the basis and for providing boat or raft accommodation for all on board. Rule 12 of the Life-Saving Appliances Rules of 1902, which deals with watertight compartments and boat accommodation, ought to be abolished. The provision of such compartments is of supreme importance, but it is clear that it should not be sought at the expense of a decrease in boat accommodation. When naval architects have devised practical means for rendering ships unsinkable, the question of boat accommodation may have to be reconsidered, but until that time arrives, boat accommodation should, where practicable, be carried for all on board. This suggestion may be thought by some to be extravagant. It has never been enforced in the mercantile marine of Great Britain, nor as far as I know in that of any foreign nation. But it appears, nevertheless, to be admitted by all that it is possible without undue inconvenience or undue interference with commerce to increase considerably in many cases the accommodation hitherto carried, and it seems therefore reasonable that the law should require an increase to be made. As far as foreign-going passenger and emigrant steamships are concerned, I am of opinion that unless justification be shown for deviating from this course, such ships should carry boats or rafts for all on board. With reference to the second branch of the complaint against the Board of Trade, namely that their officials had failed to exercise due care in the supervision of the vessel's plans and in the inspection of the work done upon her, the charges broke down. Suggestions were made that the board's requirements fell short of those of Lloyd's registry, but no evidence was forthcoming to support the suggestions. The investigation of the charges took much time, but it only served to show that the officials had discharged their duties carefully and well. Powers of the Board of Trade as regards the supervision of designs of vessels. The Titanic was efficiently designed and constructed to meet the contingencies which she was intended to meet. The bulkheads were of ample strength. They were sufficiently closely spaced and were carried up in the vessel to a height greater than sufficient to meet the requirements of the 1891 Bulkheads Committee. But I am advised that the ship could have been further subdivided so that she would probably have remained afloat longer than she did. The Board of Trade have, however, apparently no power to exercise any real supervision in the matter of subdivision. All they have express power to insist upon in this connection with respect to any steam vessel is that there shall be 4 watertight bulkheads, a provision quite inadequate for safety in a collision damaging the vessel abaft the collision bulkhead. They can also, if invited by the ship owner, but not otherwise, exercise supervision under Rule 12. This supervision, I am told, they have been invited to exercise in only 103 cases over a period of 18 years. In 69 of these cases, the board have expressed their satisfaction with the subdivision provided. It seems to me that the board should be empowered to require the production of the designs of all passenger steamers at an early period of their construction, and to direct such alterations as may appear to them to be necessary and practicable for the purpose of securing proper watertight subdivision.